Close your eyes and breathe slowly. Tonight, we're exploring one of humanity's most enduring and beloved story forms, the romantic comedy. From ancient Greek plays to Shakespeare's wit to modern movie meet cuties, from misunderstandings to happy endings, let the story of how we've told stories about love and laughter carry you gently into peaceful sleep. Our story begins over 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece, where comedy itself was born as a theatrical form. The Greeks had two main types of drama: tragedy, which ended badly, and comedy, which ended happily, often with a wedding. This fundamental formula, obstacles overcome, love triumphant, celebrations at the end, would echo through romantic comedy for millennia to come. Aristophanes, the great Greek comic playwright of the 5th century BCE, wrote comedies that often featured romantic elements alongside political satire and bawdy humor. In his play Lysistrata, women withhold sex from their husbands to force an end to war, a plot built on the battle between the sexes and the power of desire. While not a pure romantic comedy, it contains elements that would become staples of the genre: the conflict between men and women, the use of desire as motivation, and the resolution through understanding and reunion. Greek New Comedy, which emerged in the 4th century BCE with playwrights like Menander, focused more directly on romantic plots. These plays typically featured young lovers kept apart by obstacles, disapproving parents, mistaken identities, social class differences, who eventually overcame these barriers to marry. Stock characters appeared repeatedly: the clever slave who helped the lovers, the stern father, the young hero, the lovely maiden. These archetypal figures would persist in romantic comedy for thousands of years. The Romans enthusiastically adopted Greek comedy, with playwrights Plautus and Terence adapting and creating comedies for Roman audiences. Plautus wrote broadly comic plays featuring mistaken identities, clever wordplay, and romantic entanglements. His play The Pot of Gold features a miser whose daughter falls in love despite his interference, a plot that Shakespeare would later adapt. Roman comedies established patterns that became fundamental to the genre: lovers from different social classes, parents who opposed the match, servants or friends who helped the lovers trick their elders, cases of mistaken identity, and happy endings with marriage and reconciliation. These plays were performed for popular audiences, offering laughter and the reassuring message that young love would triumph over obstacles. With the fall of Rome and the rise of Christianity, theatrical comedy largely disappeared from Europe for centuries. The medieval church disapproved of theatre, seeing it as pagan and frivolous. However, comic elements persisted in other forms. Medieval literature included romantic stories, though they were often more idealized than comic. The medieval period did develop one comic tradition relevant to romantic comedy: the fabliaux, short comic tales popular in France. These stories often featured marital misunderstandings, sexual mishaps, and clever wives outwitting foolish husbands. They were earthy, bawdy, and realistic rather than idealized, presenting marriage and romance with humor and occasional cynicism. Courtly love literature, meanwhile, treated romance with high seriousness rather than comedy. Troubadour songs, Arthurian romances, and tales like Tristan and Isolde presented love as noble, tragic, and often doomed. This tradition ran parallel to comic treatments of love, offering the idealized romantic pole while fabliaux and comic tales offered the realistic, humorous pole. Romantic comedy would eventually learn to balance both. The Renaissance brought theatre roaring back to Europe, and with it came romantic comedy's true flowering. Italian commedia dell'arte troupes performed improvised comedies featuring stock characters: the lovers, the clever servants, the foolish old men, in plots involving romance, trickery, and happy endings. These traveling players influenced theatre across Europe, spreading comic techniques and romantic plot structures. But the undisputed master of romantic comedy in the Renaissance was William Shakespeare. Between approximately 1590 and 1613, Shakespeare wrote plays that established romantic comedy's essential DNA, creating works still performed and adapted today because they understand something fundamental about love, humor, and human nature. Shakespeare's romantic comedies share common elements. They feature multiple pairs of lovers, not just one couple. They include witty banter between romantic leads, particularly between strong-willed women and the men who match them. They employ mistaken identities and disguises, often with women disguising themselves as men. They move from court or city to forest or countryside, a green world where normal rules suspend and transformation becomes possible. They end with multiple marriages, celebrations, and harmony restored. A Midsummer Night's Dream, written around 1595, exemplifies Shakespearean romantic comedy. Four young Athenians flee to an enchanted forest where fairy magic causes them to fall in and out of love with the wrong people, leading to confusion, conflict, and comedy. Eventually, the proper pairs are sorted out, multiple weddings occur, and harmony prevails. The play suggests that love is irrational, chaotic, magical, that we can't entirely control who we love or why, but that this madness leads ultimately to joy. Much Ado About Nothing, written around 1598, features one of literature's greatest romantic comedy couples, Beatrice and Benedick, who engage in a merry war of wit, each declaring they'll never marry, particularly not each other. Their friends trick them into falling in love by staging conversations where each overhears that the other secretly loves them. The play understands that witty, proud people need a face-saving excuse to admit vulnerability and affection. The sparring lovers who are actually perfect for each other would become a romantic comedy staple. As You Like It, written around 1599, sends its characters to the Forest of Arden where Rosalind, disguised as a young man, encounters Orlando, who loves her but doesn't recognize her in disguise. She offers to cure him of love by pretending to be Rosalind so he can practice wooing. This elaborate game allows them to get to know each other honestly while maintaining protective distance. The play celebrates female wit and agency. Rosalind controls the action, teaching Orlando how to love her properly. Twelfth Night, written around 1601, features Viola shipwrecked and disguised as a young man, who falls in love with Duke Orsino while serving him. Orsino loves Lady Olivia, who falls in love with Viola disguised as Cesario, creating a complicated love triangle. The play explores gender, desire, and identity with surprising depth beneath its comic surface, and ends with proper pairings and marriage when identities are revealed. Shakespeare's romantic comedies established crucial patterns: love that begins with antagonism or indifference, witty verbal sparring as courtship, women who are as clever or cleverer than men, the use of disguise and deception leading to truth, and the journey to a transformative space where change becomes possible. His influence on romantic comedy cannot be overstated. Every romantic comedy since owes him a debt. After Shakespeare, romantic comedy continued in various forms. Restoration comedy in England, particularly plays by William Congreve and William Wycherley in the late 17th century, featured sophisticated, cynical wit and complex sexual politics. The Way of the World by Congreve includes one of theatre's great courtship scenes where Mirabell and Millamant negotiate a prenuptial agreement of conditions for their marriage, each demanding freedom and respect within the union. These plays were witty and worldly, written for aristocratic audiences. The 18th century brought the novel as a major literary form, and romantic comedy found a new home. Samuel Richardson's Pamela, 1740, told of a servant girl who resists her master's seductions and eventually wins his respect and hand in marriage through her virtue. While sentimental rather than comic, it established the cross-class romance plot that would recur endlessly. Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, 1749, took a more comic approach, following the adventures of a foundling who loves Sophia Weston but must overcome obstacles of class, reputation, and misunderstanding before they can marry. The novel was picaresque, bawdy, and humorous while also romantic. Jane Austen, writing in the early 19th century, created romantic comedies of such perfection that they've never been surpassed. Her novels combined sharp social observation, sparkling wit, deep psychological insight, and genuine romance. She understood that romantic comedy could be both entertaining and serious, both funny and emotionally true. Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813, is perhaps the perfect romantic comedy. Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy begin with mutual dislike based on pride and prejudice. He thinks her beneath him socially, she thinks him arrogant and cruel. Through misunderstandings, revelations, and gradual understanding, they each recognize their faults and the other's virtues. I cannot fix on the hour, or the spot, or the look, or the words, which laid the foundation. Elizabeth reflects on falling in love. I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun. Austen's other novels followed similar patterns while varying the specifics. Emma features a heroine who must recognize she loves her longtime friend Mr. Knightley. Persuasion reunites lovers separated years earlier by bad advice. Sense and Sensibility contrasts two sisters' approaches to love. Each novel takes the romantic comedy formula and deepens it with psychological realism and social critique. Austen established several crucial romantic comedy elements: the couple who dislike each other initially, lovers separated by class or misunderstanding, the gradual recognition of true character, the importance of friendship and respect alongside passion, and happy endings that feel earned rather than simply bestowed. She proved romantic comedy could be both light entertainment and serious art. The Victorian era produced countless romantic novels, from Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre to Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South. These were often more melodramatic than purely comic, but they incorporated romantic comedy elements: misunderstandings, barriers to love, eventual happy unions. Victorian theatre featured light romantic comedies and operettas. Gilbert and Sullivan's comic operas like The Pirates of Penzance and The Mikado included romantic subplots amid their satire and songs. These were family entertainment, clever and tuneful, with young lovers overcoming obstacles to marry. Oscar Wilde's plays in the 1890s brought sophisticated wit to romantic comedy. The Importance of Being Earnest, 1895, is a perfect comic confection, featuring mistaken identities, deceptions, and two couples whose romantic complications resolve happily. Wilde's sparkling dialogue and satirical edge influenced countless later romantic comedies. The early 20th century saw romantic comedy flourish on stage and in the new medium of film. Silent films quickly discovered that romance and comedy worked beautifully together. Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp often pursued love, usually hopelessly, combining pathos and humor. Harold Lloyd and Buster Keaton created romantic comedies where physical comedy and romantic pursuit intertwined. The arrival of sound in the late 1920s revolutionized romantic comedy films. Now audiences could hear witty dialogue, sophisticated banter, and verbal sparring. The 1930s and 40s are considered the golden age of romantic comedy, producing films of sparkling wit and enduring appeal. It Happened One Night, 1934, directed by Frank Capra, essentially created the template for screwball comedy, a subgenre of romantic comedy characterized by fast-paced action, madcap situations, and verbal sparring between equals. Claudette Colbert plays a runaway heiress who falls for Clark Gable's cynical reporter during a chaotic cross-country journey. The film established crucial patterns: lovers from different social classes, a journey or adventure that throws them together, the meet-cute, an amusing or charming first encounter, an antagonism that masks attraction. Screwball comedies dominated the late 1930s. Bringing Up Baby, 1938, features Katharine Hepburn as a madcap heiress who disrupts Cary Grant's orderly life with a leopard, a dog, and a missing dinosaur bone. The Philadelphia Story, 1940, reunites ex-spouses played by Hepburn and Grant on the eve of her remarriage. His Girl Friday, 1940, puts Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant, ex-spouses and newspaper colleagues, in rapid-fire verbal combat over her impending remarriage. These films featured strong, witty women who were men's equals, sometimes their superiors, in intelligence and verbal dexterity. The romance came through sparring, not submission. The films moved fast, with overlapping dialogue and complicated plots. They were sophisticated, assuming audience intelligence and rewarding attention. The 1940s continued this tradition while adding new notes. The Shop Around the Corner, 1940, featured James Stewart and Margaret Sullivan as bickering co-workers who don't realize they are anonymous romantic pen pals. This plot would be recycled repeatedly, including in You've Got Mail, 1998. The film understood that the barrier to love could be the lover's own blindness to what's right in front of them. Adam's Rib, 1949, starred Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, one of cinema's great romantic comedy teams, as married lawyers on opposite sides of a trial. Their relationship combined genuine affection with competitive sparring, showing that marriage could include both partnership and conflict. The 1950s brought romantic comedies a new sweetness, less screwball chaos and more gentle charm. Roman Holiday, 1953, featured Audrey Hepburn as a princess who escapes her duties for one day of freedom in Rome, falling for Gregory Peck's reporter who knows her identity but doesn't reveal that he knows. The film is bittersweet. They fall in love but can't be together, creating a romantic comedy that acknowledges real obstacles don't always yield to love. Sabrina, 1954, offered the Cinderella story via Billy Wilder's sophisticated direction, with Hepburn as a chauffeur's daughter transformed and pursued by two wealthy brothers. The cross-class romance remained evergreen, the fantasy that love transcends social barriers. The 1960s saw romantic comedy evolve with changing social mores. Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961, despite its problematic elements, captured something of the era's glamour and loneliness, with Hepburn's Holly Golightly slowly opening her heart to George Peppard's writer. The Graduate, 1967, was a dark romantic comedy for the counterculture generation, featuring Dustin Hoffman as a confused young man who has an affair with Mrs. Robinson before falling for her daughter. The film's ending, Benjamin and Elaine on a bus, uncertain what they've just done, suggested ambiguity about love and happy endings unusual for romantic comedy. The 1970s were challenging for romantic comedy. The decade's cynicism, the sexual revolution, and cultural upheaval made traditional romantic comedy seem outdated. Annie Hall, 1977, Woody Allen's masterpiece, created a new kind of romantic comedy for the era, neurotic, self-aware, and ultimately bittersweet. Alvy and Annie fall in love, break up, and don't get back together. The film suggested that not all love stories end happily, but that love itself still matters, still shapes us. The 1980s saw romantic comedy's resurgence, though with new characteristics for the Reagan era. When Harry Met Sally, 1989, written by Nora Ephron, asked whether men and women could be friends without sex interfering. Harry and Sally meet, dislike each other, become friends over years, and eventually fall in love. The film's structure, friendship deepening into love, influenced countless later romantic comedies. The fake orgasm scene in a deli became iconic, as did Meg Ryan's haircuts and sweaters. The film made New York City a romantic comedy character, a tradition of films set in glamorous cities. It featured witty dialogue, neurotic characters discussing relationships endlessly, and the now standard structure of couple interviews punctuating the main story. The 1990s were romantic comedy's last great era in film. Pretty Woman, 1990, updated Pygmalion and My Fair Lady with Julia Roberts as a sex worker and Richard Gere as the wealthy businessman who hires then falls for her. The film's Cinderella fantasy, complete with shopping montage, made it hugely popular despite problematic elements. Sleepless in Seattle, 1993, another Nora Ephron script, reunited Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks in a romance where they barely meet until the final scene. The film understood that romantic comedy could play with its own conventions, referencing an affair to remember while creating its own story. Four Weddings and a Funeral, 1994, brought British romantic comedy back to prominence with Hugh Grant's stammering charm. The film followed a group of friends through multiple weddings and one funeral, with Grant's character slowly realizing he loves Andie MacDowell's American. The film was funny, touching, and sophisticated, proving romantic comedy could handle death, doubt, and difficulty. While You Were Sleeping, 1995, starred Sandra Bullock in a mistaken identity plot worthy of Shakespeare. She's mistaken for the fiancé of a man in a coma, falls for his brother, and must untangle the confusion. The film had warmth and humor, creating a lived-in family world. You've Got Mail, 1998, updated the shop around the corner for the internet age, with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks as rival bookstore owners who are also anonymous email correspondents. The film captured something about online connection while maintaining romantic comedy's essential patterns. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw romantic comedy become somewhat formulaic. Studios had discovered a profitable formula and repeated it. Quirky woman meets handsome man, complications ensue, they break up around minute 75, they reunite for a happy ending. Settings rotated: New York, Los Angeles, occasionally other cities. The leads were almost always white, straight, attractive, and comfortably middle class or wealthy. However, some films stood out. Notting Hill, 1999, paired Hugh Grant with Julia Roberts in a cross-class romance, bookshop owner and movie star. The film acknowledged the fantasy while playing it sincerely. 10 Things I Hate About You, 1999, adapted Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew for a high school setting, proving teenagers could carry romantic comedy. The 2000s saw romantic comedy grow stale in film while thriving in other media. Films like 27 Dresses, 2008, The Ugly Truth, 2009, and countless others followed similar formulas. They were pleasant, occasionally charming, rarely surprising. Critics began declaring romantic comedy dead or dying, pointing to declining box office and creative stagnation. Television, however, was creating sophisticated romantic comedies. Shows could develop relationships over seasons rather than 90 minutes, allowing for greater depth and complexity. Friends, 1994 to 2004, featured multiple will they won't they couples, particularly Ross and Rachel, stretching their romance over a decade. How I Met Your Mother, 2005 to 2014, was essentially a long romantic comedy about meeting the perfect partner. The Office, 2005 to 2013, gave us Jim and Pam, whose slow-burn romance developed over seasons through meaningful glances, inside jokes, and genuine friendship before romance. The show understood that romantic comedy works best when we care about the characters as people, not just as romantic objects. The 2010s brought both decline and innovation to romantic comedy. Film studios largely abandoned mid-budget romantic comedies, seeing them as unprofitable in an era of superhero blockbusters. Romantic comedy stars like Meg Ryan, Julia Roberts, and Sandra Bullock aged out of leading roles without clear successors. The genre that had been Hollywood's staple became nearly extinct in theaters. Streaming services filled the gap. Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon produced numerous romantic comedies, offering alternatives to theatrical releases. These streaming rom-coms ranged from terrible to charming, but they kept the genre alive. Set It Up, 2018, and To All the Boys I've Loved Before, 2018, were genuinely delightful, proving romantic comedy wasn't dead, just migrating to new platforms. Television continued romantic comedy's evolution. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, 2015 to 2019, was a musical romantic comedy that deconstructed the genre's tropes while being genuinely romantic and funny. It examined obsessive love, mental health, and the gap between romantic fantasy and reality with unusual honesty. The Good Place, 2016 to 2020, while primarily a philosophical comedy, developed into a profound romantic comedy exploring whether we can become better people and whether love transcends death and memory wipes. Eleanor and Chidi's romance was sweet, funny, and surprisingly deep. The 2010s also saw romantic comedy begin addressing its diversity problem. Crazy Rich Asians, 2018, was a romantic comedy with an all-Asian cast, a rarity in Hollywood. The film succeeded both critically and commercially, proving audiences wanted romantic comedies about people who didn't look like traditional Hollywood leads. LGBTQ+ romantic comedies began appearing more frequently. Love, Simon, 2018, was a gay teen romantic comedy from a major studio, a first. Happiest Season, 2020, was a lesbian Christmas romantic comedy. These films adapted familiar romantic comedy patterns while addressing specific experiences of queer love and coming out. Throughout romantic comedy's long history, certain elements persist. The couple who initially dislike each other but are actually perfect together. The couple kept apart by circumstances, misunderstandings, or outside interference. The grand romantic gesture that wins back the beloved. The race to stop a wedding. The meet-cute. The makeover. The best friend who gives advice. The city that serves as romantic backdrop. The happy ending. Critics sometimes dismiss romantic comedy as formulaic, as mere escapism. And it's true that romantic comedies follow patterns, that their endings are generally predictable. But this misses what romantic comedy offers. In an uncertain world, romantic comedy provides the reassuring message that love is possible, that despite obstacles and misunderstandings, people can find connection and happiness. Romantic comedy at its best does something more sophisticated than critics acknowledge. It explores how we present ourselves versus who we really are, how we overcome pride and prejudice to see clearly, how we balance individual autonomy with partnership, how we find someone who sees us truly and loves us anyway. These are profound human concerns, handled with lightness and humor but no less meaningful for that. The witty banter of romantic comedy represents something important. The idea that partners should be intellectual equals, that conversation and humor matter in relationships, that love includes friendship and respect. The sparring lovers of Beatrice and Benedict, Elizabeth and Darcy, Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, Harry and Sally, represent relationships of equals, neither dominating, both contributing. The obstacles in romantic comedy, class differences, family opposition, personal flaws, misunderstandings, represent real barriers to love. Yes, in romantic comedy these obstacles are overcome, but the stories acknowledge they exist. They validate the difficulty of finding and maintaining love while ultimately being optimistic about its possibility. The happy endings of romantic comedy offer something valuable: hope. Not naive belief that love solves everything, but hope that love is possible, that connection matters, that we're not alone. In a genre often dismissed as lightweight, there's actually something profound in affirming human connection and happiness. Modern romantic comedy continues evolving. The formula remains recognizable: lovers who overcome obstacles to be together, but the specifics change with cultural values. Contemporary romantic comedies increasingly feature more diverse casts, more equal relationships, more realistic conflicts, and happy endings that don't require giving up career or identity. Rest now, and let these stories of love and laughter settle gently in your mind. From ancient Greek plays to Netflix streams, from Aristophanes to Austen to Ephron, humans have told stories about people finding love, overcoming obstacles, and ending happily. These stories endure because they speak to something fundamental: our hope for connection, our belief in love's possibility, our need for laughter and joy. Whether you love romantic comedies or find them silly, whether you've seen every rom-com or avoid them entirely, these stories are part of our cultural conversation about love, relationships, and happiness. They reflect and shape how we think about romance, what we expect from partners, how we navigate the complicated dance of courtship and commitment. Sleep peacefully, knowing that somewhere, someone is watching or reading or writing a romantic comedy, enjoying the familiar pleasure of lovers overcoming obstacles to find happiness. The pattern repeats because it works, because we never tire of seeing love triumph, of watching people find each other and choose each other and commit to facing life together. Dream of meet cuties and witty banter, of misunderstandings resolved and love declared. Dream of running through airports and standing outside windows with boomboxes, of grand gestures and quiet moments of recognition. Dream of the perfect romantic comedy, whatever that means to you, sophisticated or sweet, classic or contemporary, realistic or fantastical. Tomorrow is another day, and whether it brings romance or not, you can carry with you romantic comedy's essential message: that connection is possible, that love exists, that despite all obstacles and complications, people can find each other and choose each other and build happiness together. Rest now. Let the long history of romantic comedy, from ancient Athens to modern streaming, remind you that humans have always told stories about love, have always believed that despite everything, love is worth pursuing, worth celebrating, worth the obstacles and uncertainty. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with whatever romantic comedy your heart desires, witty and sophisticated or warm and gentle, set in glamorous cities or small towns, featuring whatever kind of love speaks to you. The genre is vast enough to hold infinite variations, all sharing the fundamental hope that love, in the end, prevails. Good night. Dream of happy endings, because sometimes, the world needs to believe that such things are possible.